She was publicly humiliated in the hotel lobby, accused of theft, no proof, no voice. A chambermaid for over a decade, always correct, always invisible, now exposed as a criminal. And all of this, in front of a mysterious guest, silent, observing every detail with eyes no one noticed. What no one knew was that this man wasn't there by chance, and that this story was about to be turned upside down in a way no one expected. While they laughed at her stutter and mocked her faith, Olivia wrote handwritten notes of hope and left flowers wherever she went. She was the target of jokes, but carried a dignity others couldn't understand. And it was this woman, with a trembling voice and a steadfast heart, who touched something deep within the man in room 7. From that moment on, everything began to change. But no one saw it, because what was about to happen couldn't be captured by the security cameras. And when the truth came to light, no protocol could conceal it. This isn't just another story of overcoming adversity. It's a turnaround, built in silence. No audience, no speeches. A woman who didn't know how to use pretty words, but who was heard in a way that changed everything. And a man who didn't speak a single word at first, but who later made the entire world listen. Together they proved that faith, when it's real, doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to find someone who recognizes it. You will feel indignation. You will question where justice was. You will be moved by an unlikely friendship born from pain. But what will keep you hooked until the very end is what this mysterious guest does when he uncovers the truth, what he reveals, and how this transforms the life of someone the world decided to forget. Because there are stories that only happen when no one is watching, and this one you'll want to watch until the very last second.
Before diving into this exciting story, we want to make sure you don't miss out on any of our incredible content. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, now is the perfect time to do so. By subscribing, you'll become a valued member of our growing community, where we share amazing stories, insightful lessons, and much more. Don't wait any longer. Hit that subscribe button now and join us on this amazing journey.
Olivia's hands slid over the sheets with a precision that was almost religious. She stretched each corner meticulously, smoothing the fabric with her calloused palm, as if asking the world for silence. In room 3, the soft scent of lavender filled the air, and the afternoon sun poured through the window, illuminating the crucifix she wore around her neck. Sweat trickled down her neck, but she smiled, a subtle smile, from someone who knew that serving well was her way of staying whole. As she left, she adjusted her uniform with an automatic gesture and walked down the narrow hallway, pushing the cart filled with clean sheets and hope, in silence. Vanderlei passed by her whistling. "Careful there, saint of sheets, don't trip on your faith," he muttered with a crooked smile. Natalia laughed loudly behind him, while Fabiana whispered something poisonous. Olivia didn't respond. She simply lowered her gaze, adjusted her bun with trembling fingers, and kept going. It wasn't fear, it was habit. Since she was a child, when she would mix up words in school and become the joke of her classmates, she learned that speaking could be dangerous. The stutter, which came and went like an old acquaintance, was both her shield and her prison. And now at 50, she wore silence like armor. The manager, Claudia, watched from the reception, arms crossed, heels firm on the polished floor. "Miss Mura, please avoid lingering in the rooms. Excellence demands pace." The tone was cold, sharp, wrapped in the poisonous politeness of someone who confuses humility with incompetence. Olivia only nodded, her eyes misty, though no one noticed. She returned to her work, as she always did, with her dignity intact despite the disdain. Her soul carried scars, but no wound was greater than her promise, never to dishonor the memory of her son, the one who left too soon. As night fell, when the guests were already dining and the hallways grew silent, Olivia slipped quietly into the maintenance room. It was cramped, smelling of damp brooms and cleaning products, but here she felt safe. She kneeled beside the sink, took the crucifix from her neck and held it between her fingers as if holding time itself. She said nothing, She simply closed her eyes and let the silence do the work of faith. Outside, the laughter of her colleagues echoed, distant and bitter, but it couldn't cross the threshold of her silent prayer. It was the only place where she was still heard. God, forgive what I can't say," she murmured almost soundlessly. The words came broken, but the heart spoke as a whole. She remembered her mother, who taught her to pray even when the world seemed deaf. She remembered her son, the last time she saw him smiling lying on that hospital bed. The memory burned like alcohol on an open wound, but she didn't cry. She simply pressed the crucifix to her chest and took a deep breath, as if each sigh were an anchor against the shipwreck of her soul. Outside, the sky began to darken. A distant thunder announced rain for the early hours. The imaginary camera would pull away from the slightly ajar door of the small room, revealing the chambermaid kneeling among mops and buckets, surrounded by silence and faith. The music, if there was any, would be soft, sad, but with a note of hope. Because unknowingly, Olivia was about to be seen, not by the eyes that judge, but by the eyes that recognize. And the man who carried that vision had already arrived at the hotel. He arrived on a cold late afternoon, when the fog had already begun to descend the hills of the Mantiqueira Mountains, hiding the tall trees in a gray, damp shroud. The black car stopped in front of the reception, and a man stepped out, his face heavy, eyes lost, dressed in well-kept but disheveled clothes. He used the name D.M. Carter for the reservation, a bureaucratic disguise for someone who just wanted to disappear. The receptionist typed in his details without asking questions. The manager merely pointed to Chalet 7 with an apathetic gesture, and he, with a small suitcase in hand and a worn notebook tucked under his arm, climbed the stone path without looking back. Olivia, who was gathering bed linens near the garden, observed discreetly as he passed by. There was something about this man that stood apart from the other guests. It wasn't his wrinkled suit or his unshaven face, but the silence. A thick silence. The kind that doesn't come from shyness, but from pain. In the chalet, Darius, although no one knew his real name, placed the notebook on the nightstand and sat on the porch. He spent hours there, motionless, staring at the dormant lake. He wrote a few lines, crossed out others. He didn't answer calls. He didn't reply to emails. His world now was one thing only: the world within. The following days followed the same routine. Breakfast alone without words. Short walks to the deck. Long periods of standing under the weak sun, eyes empty. At night, the chalet light stayed on late, but not from distraction. It was insomnia, accompanied only by the sound of a pen gliding across paper. Olivia noticed his presence as one feels the change in the weather, not out of curiosity, but out of compassion. And because she knew that kind of silent pain, the kind that doesn't shout, it just weighs. Then on a gray morning, she made a small gesture. A handwritten note, shaky handwriting, the paper folded with care, resting on the nightstand. Even when everything seems lost, God hasn't given up on you yet. No name, no signature, just that. And beside it, a wildflower picked from the garden. Darius saw the gesture in the late afternoon. He read the note twice. He smiled with his eyes for the first time in weeks. He didn't say anything to anyone, but he began to watch that chambermaid with timid steps and a welcoming gaze. There was something about her that reminded him he was still human. In the following days, Olivia continued her routine, pretending not to know that she had been noticed. She passed by Chalet 7 more carefully. Sometimes she left the flower, other times she switched the note. Always short, simple, with the strength of someone who speaks little, but feels much. Darius began to respond with subtle gestures, a glass left on the porch, a napkin with a handwritten quote, a whispered, "Thank you," in the wind. They hadn't exchanged words yet, but the silence between them was already dialogue, a dialogue between two souls too tired to pretend normality. On a drizzly night, while Olivia was closing the windows in the laundry room, Darius passed by her and stopped. He looked into her eyes and said in a hoarse voice, "Do you really believe in this? That God hasn't given up on us?" She swallowed hard. The stutter almost came, but she took a deep breath. I believe, because we still believe." Darius nodded slowly and walked away without saying anything more. But in that moment, amidst the fog and the wet concrete, something inside him stirred, a sprout of faith, fragile, but alive. The morning began with the sun hidden behind the clouds and the cold sliced through the air like a knife. Olivia was sweeping the porch of Chalet 3 when she heard muffled laughter coming from the break room. She didn't need to hear the words to know they were about her. She already knew that tone, the mockery disguised as a joke, the cruelty wrapped in laughter. She thinks she's a saint now. Seducing the guest with verses, can you imagine? Whispered Fabiana. Natalia laughed loudly, and Vanderlei added, "She's probably going to marry the mysterious guest. Hallelujah." The sound echoed through the halls, but Olivia didn't respond. She simply lowered her eyes and gripped the broom tightly. Darius, who had been sitting under the pergola near the garden, heard every word. He didn't make a scene, he just observed. When the staff walked past him, he gave a slight smile, a smile that wasn't kindness, but a warning. His eyes were firm, hard, as if he wouldn't tolerate any more cowardice disguised as joking. From then on, they began to avoid him. He, in turn, began watching Olivia more closely, not out of pity, but out of recognition. That woman walked with her head down, but her soul stood tall. That afternoon, he waited for her outside the laundry room. Her face startled when she saw him there, but he spoke first. "I'd like to thank you for the note, the flowers, the courage." She tried to smile, but the stutter came first. You don't have to, I just want." He raised his hand, gently interrupting. "You reminded me that there is still beauty in the small things, even when we can't see it anymore." The silence between them was long, but not uncomfortable. It was a rare kind of peace, the kind that arises when two pains recognize each other. In the days that followed, the conversations grew. They started short. Simple exchanges. "How are you today? The lake looks beautiful. I used to walk with my son in places like this." Little by little, Olivia began to open up. She told him she lost her husband in a car accident, and her son to a disease that came fast and didn't ask for permission. Darius listened without interrupting. When she finished, he didn't say, "I'm so sorry." He simply lowered his head and replied, "I also lost someone, but I think it was myself." It was the first time Olivia saw his eyes filled with tears. "One of those afternoons under the shade of the fig tree," he said. "I've thought about leaving. For good." She didn't answer immediately. The wind blew through the leaves, and they both watched the lake in silence. Then she spoke, her voice trembling but firm. God hasn't finished yet." He looked at her with surprise, almost laughing. "How can you be so sure?" She raised her eyes and whispered back, Because you're still here." Darius didn't say anything more. He simply nodded and closed his eyes for a moment, as if accepting a truth too simple to deny. But at that very moment, hidden behind a wall, Fabiana watched the scene with narrowed eyes, and envy, like a seed buried in the dark, began to sprout. That night, the wind blew harder than usual. The windows of the chalets trembled slightly, and the scent of wet earth foreshadowed the rain to come. Inside the hotel, the atmosphere was warm, but heavy. Claudia walked through the corridors with hurried, nervous steps. Fabiana approached with a forced smile. "Everything's ready." The manager merely nodded, but her gaze carried an acidic firmness. The plan was in motion, and the first piece was the invisible chambermaid of the morning shift. The one who smiled too much, prayed in silence, and, to them, had crossed the line of discretion. Vanderlei was tasked with hiding the watch. He went up to Chalet 11 during the afternoon cleaning, opened the executive's suitcase and with trembling hands took the golden Rolex. He went down the service stairs and, unnoticed, stuffed the item into the supply closet in Block B, the one only Olivia had access to. He then locked it with the master key and returned to the kitchen with the expression of someone who had just committed a sin and convinced themselves it was justice. She needs to learn that people like her don't belong near any guest, he murmured. Early the next morning, receptionist Natalia received a fake call from a guest reporting the disappearance of the watch. The rehearsed tone, the measured drama. Claudia, with restrained theatricality, ordered a search. She pretended to be surprised when she found the item in the cleaning closet. Call the team. Now. In a few minutes, the staff was gathered in the lobby, like a small audience awaiting the spectacle of humiliation. Darius watched everything from afar, standing at the door of the dining room. Still unaware, Olivia was called to the center of the hall. Her hair still damp from the light rain, she held a face towel in her hands. Claudia opened the closet in front of everyone, and there it was, the watch, gleaming among bottles of disinfectant and cleaning rags. "Is this yours, Mrs. Mora?" she asked, already with the tone of a sentence. Olivia's eyes widened. She tried to speak, but the words simply wouldn't come. Never. I would never." The stutter cut through the air like a knife. Claudia crossed her arms and made the accusation coldly. "Unfortunately, the item was found among your materials, and you're the only one with access to this key." The muffled laughter of the colleagues cut through the air like shards. Vanderlei remained silent, avoiding eye contact. Fabiana feigned astonishment. Natalia stared at her phone, openly disdainful. Darius, from a distance, approached slowly. He felt his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. He saw Olivia pale, her trembling hands trying to explain what her mouth couldn't. And something inside him, something that had been asleep for a long time, awoke with contained fury. It wasn't just injustice, it was violence disguised as formality. Claudia gave the verdict without hesitation. "You will be suspended until further notice. The management does not tolerate this kind of behavior from anyone." Olivia stood, still, her eyes misty but without tears. Just a dense silence, almost sacred, like someone watching the ground open up and having nowhere to run. Darius clenched his fists. A thunderclap rumbled in the distance, as if the sky had also heard. Yet what no one there knew was that at that exact moment, Darius's voice, and the one he had silenced for months, would begin to return. The ground seemed to vanish beneath Olivia's feet. Her legs wavered, but she didn't fall. She stood there in the center of the lobby, her hands trembling and her breath shallow, as if every glance around her were a blade about to tear apart her dignity. She tried to speak. I swear." But the stutter wouldn't let her. The words, which were already difficult in her daily life, now felt like they were screaming inside her without sound. Claudia remained firm, her arms crossed and her expression that of someone merely fulfilling her role. "Theft is serious. I can't turn a blind eye." The whole room fell silent, but not in respect. It was the silence of condemnation. Darius approached slowly. The watch gleamed on, the table like a golden accusation. He stared at Olivia for a few seconds. He saw her face collapse without a single shout. He saw her hands twisting as if they were holding on to the last remnants of her soul. And then he looked at Claudia, with the coldness of someone who had buried many truths. "I want to see the records of this complaint." The manager didn't even blink. "This is an internal procedure. You're not authorized." Darius said nothing more, but the tension in the air shifted. It was as if the silence around them was now about to explode. Olivia tried to argue again, but her throat closed up. Please, never." The humiliation was so great that her body seemed to want to disappear. Claudia interrupted with a sharp gesture. "There's no point in insisting. The item was found in your area. We have no choice." Fabiana pretended to be shaken. Vanderlei kept his eyes fixed on the floor. Natalia wrote something on a notepad just to avoid looking at the scene. Darius watched everything with blood boiling in his veins. The weight of injustice wasn't new to him, but seeing it happen before his eyes, to that woman who only knew how to offer flowers and words of faith, it was intolerable. The dismissal was immediate. "Pack your things. You'll be escorted to the exit." A hotel security guard appeared out of nowhere, as if part of the script. Olivia lowered her eyes. She didn't beg. She didn't scream. She simply walked to the back room, where she kept her purse, her mother's handkerchief, and the old rosary, with worn beads. Each step felt heavier. At the end of the hallway before leaving, she looked back. Not to defend herself, but as someone bidding farewell to a place that had never embraced her. Darius followed her with his eyes. In that moment, a scene from his childhood resurfaced, his mother being unjustly accused by a rich employer in silence. The pain was the same. The sky broke into heavy rain shortly after, thick, violent, as if nature itself were screaming. Darius went up to his chalet without dinner, without speaking. He took his notebook and began writing compulsively. Names, dates, observations. The notebook now had a purpose, because something had broken. Not just Olivia's silence, but his own. And when a man like him decides to speak, the voices that humiliated begin to tremble. The rain was still falling when Darius stepped out of the chalet, this time in a dark suit, his gaze firm, and a black briefcase under his arm. The damp corridors and the creak of the wood under his shoes gave the scene a solemn sound, almost like a courtroom. At the reception, Natalia tried to stop him with a hesitant smile. Do you need something, sir?" He simply said, "Call the regional manager, immediately." Claudia, who had been watching from the top of the stairs, descended with her heels clicking on the polished floor, urgency disguised as authority. "Mr. Carter, is something wrong?" Darius lifted his eyes and replied with the calm of someone who no longer fears, "My name is Dr. Darius Miller." The room froze. The name echoed in the air like a secret unearthed. Claudia blinked, confused. The regional manager, who had arrived the previous day for a surprise inspection, approached. Darius opened the briefcase and pulled out a folded document, his order ID. He handed it directly to the manager without taking his eyes off Claudia. "I'm a criminal defense attorney." The words came clear without emphasis, like a hammer that strikes without effort. The manager read, furrowed his brow, and quickly typed something on his phone. Within seconds, his eyes widened. "Darius Miller," he murmured. A known name. Quickly searched. A national reference. One of the most sought-after criminal lawyers in the country, known for high-profile cases and defending those accused unjustly. Award-winning. A guest on programs, recognized for his humble origins and his strong stance against institutional abuses. The manager swallowed hard. Claudia, still unaware, felt the tension creeping down her spine. "Today," Darius continued, "a woman was accused, exposed, and dismissed without defense, without investigation, all based on a fragile assumption sustained by a history of hostility and prejudice." Claudia tried to react, but the item was in her possession. "We followed the protocol. You followed what suits those who have already decided what kind of people deserve to be heard." His voice was low, but each word cut with surgical precision. "And today, the ones who will answer questions are not her. It's you." The manager asked for a private room. He led Darius to the office and instructed to bring the reports, the camera footage, the entry logs. The investigation would begin that night. "And her?" the manager asked. "Where is she?" Darius took a deep breath. "At home. Silent. Ashamed, like my mother was once for a similar mistake." Silence filled the room. It was heavy, but just. Later, back in his room, Darius took off his shoes, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the crucifix he now carried with him, the same one Olivia wore, the same one she had dropped without realizing. "They don't know your name yet, Olivia," he whispered, "but they'll have to learn to respect it." The rain outside was slowly subsiding, and the name she carried, in silence, began to echo in the halls where only disdain had existed before. The news spread through the hotel walls like wind between dry trees. No one spoke loudly, but everyone knew. Cameras started being reviewed, timetables crossed, keys checked. The regional manager, now visibly tense, took charge of the audit. Claudia disappeared from the front lines for 2 days. Fabiana began avoiding the hallways, and Vanderlei could barely hold the silverware in the kitchen. Every hour, a piece of the theater set up against Olivia fell to the floor, and beneath the act, the truth began to emerge in fragments. Silent, relentless. The next morning, Darius took a taxi and asked to be driven to a small house on the outskirts of the village. The dirt floor, the old wooden fence, the clothesline with simple clothes swaying in the wind. He knocked slowly on the door. Olivia opened it with deep eyes, as if still expecting the final blow. When she saw him, her eyes widened, but she didn't say anything. Darius simply extended the rosary she had left behind. "I think this belongs to you." She took it with trembling hands, lowered her gaze, and murmured, Thank you, but you don't have to come here." "I do," he interrupted, his voice soft. "I came because you saved me. Now it's my turn." Olivia stepped aside with a shy gesture. The inside of the house was simple, clean, with sparse furniture and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. The wooden table had a worn tablecloth, but it was immaculate. She offered him a seat. He accepted. And for the first time since they arrived at this place, they looked at each other as equals, two survivors of life, sitting side by side without needing to say everything. The silence, this time, was comforting. Darius told her that the audit was ongoing, that he would take responsibility for everything without delegating, that the records already showed serious flaws in the procedure. "If you want, I can represent you legally. We can file a lawsuit for moral damages, discrimination." She slowly lifted her eyes and responded with a soft voice. "I don't want vengeance. Just peace." He nodded. He respected that, and inside, something within him shifted. That need to conquer the world began to give way to the need to reconnect with it. They stayed there for an hour, maybe more. She served coffee in old cups, offered a simple piece of cake. He ate as if to say thanks. Before leaving, she said a phrase he would never forget. "I never asked to be heard, just not to be forgotten." Her voice still trembling, but as firm as it had ever been. When Darius got into the car and looked back, he saw Olivia waving from the door, the sun shining on her wrinkled face. For the first time in a long while, he felt that maybe, just maybe, he was going back home. The announcement came on a clear morning, with the sky blue as if drawn with hope. The Cedar Hill chain released an official statement signed by the regional manager. After an internal review, inconsistencies were found in the procedure applied to employee Olivia Moura. In the name of ethics and respect, we offer our public apologies. It was dry, formal, but in the silence between the lines, there was a confession. Claudia was dismissed from her position. Fabiana, Vanderlei, and Natalia signed warning agreements and were removed under higher recommendation. The cleanup was swift, discreet, but Olivia stayed home, tending to the plants, as if still waiting for the storm. Darius visited her again at the end of that same week. He wore jeans and a simple shirt, his hair loose, his demeanor lighter. In his hand, an envelope. Inside, an invitation. Not a job offer, but a gesture of honor. "I want to ask something of you, not as a favor, nor as compensation, But because I trust you. Olivia read slowly, syllable by syllable. It was an invitation to live in South Carolina as the housekeeper for his country estate, an old, secluded mansion where he planned to start over with his teenage daughter. That house needs care, but more than that, it needs peace. She hesitated. She squeezed the rosary between her fingers as she always did when facing big decisions, her eyes misty. But, I'm just a chambermaid. He smiled, for the first time with ease. No, you are the most complete woman I've ever met, and no one gets as whole as you are, by accident. The silence stretched, and she looked out the open window. Outside, a butterfly landed on the clothesline. Then, with a trembling voice and wet eyes, she nodded. Yes, I'll go. At the farewell, Olivia packed a few clothes, a light blue dress, a gift from her late sister, her mother's rosary, and the faith notes she used to write and store in cardboard boxes. No jewelry, perfumes, or framed memories, just things that carried a soul. The new hotel manager, younger, more sensitive, gave her a shy hug before she left. Darius waited in the car, the trunk open, the radio playing softly. When she got in the passenger seat, he said, "Thank you for waiting for me." And she responded with a whisper, "It's never too late for those who have courage." The road descended down the mountain like a ribbon of promises. The sky was clear, but there was something in the light of that morning that said more than the sun. Olivia rested her head on the window glass. She felt her heart light, but firm. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't running away. She was going. The house waiting for her was not a prize, but a new ground. And she, who had always cared for the roots of others, was finally starting to plant her own. The mansion wasn't opulent. It was old, made of white wood and wide windows with the scent of stories hidden in the floorboards, nestled on a wooded plot in South Carolina, surrounded by dirt trails and a garden still to be made. Olivia arrived, with small steps and watchful eyes. She didn't seem like a maid nor a guest. It was as if somehow that house already knew her. Darius welcomed her on the porch with a discreet smile and pointed to the horizon. "The field is yours. You can plant whatever you like." She simply smiled without stuttering. Her silence was a complete answer. In the first month, Olivia cleaned the house with the care of someone preparing a temple. She polished the floors, reorganized the cabinets, washed the curtains, and opened all the windows, as if inviting the light to enter. In the garden, she started a small bed of sunflowers and tomatoes. She had never planted before, but she did everything with a devotion that came from within. "Seeds are promises," she would whisper softly as she buried the grains. At night, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the sky. She didn't speak much, but she smiled. Her body still carried the weariness of years of struggle, but now there was peace. Darius gradually returned to his routine of studies and readings, but now he read slowly. He took notes with less rigidity. He still had crises, of guilt, of emptiness, of memories. But Olivia knew when his silence was pain, and in those moments she made stronger coffee or left a verse on the office door. She didn't intrude. She simply was. And he slowly began to trust. He told her about his difficult childhood, the struggle to get into college, the constant fear of disappointing. She listened without judgment, without trying to heal. Sometimes all it took was every warrior gets tired too. Darius's daughter, a 15-year-old teenager, arrived during the holidays. Her name was Amara. Shy, observant, with braided hair and eyes that carried silent questions. At first, she treated Olivia with some formality. She found it strange, having a simple woman take care of the house. But she was won over by the smell of cornbread, the stories whispered at night, and the notes Olivia left on her desk. "Don't be ashamed to feel. Feeling is for the living." One day, Amara said to Olivia, almost in secret, You remind me of my grandmother. And there the bridge was built. The mornings began to smell like fresh coffee and wet earth. The garden flourished. Amara played the piano around the house. Darius wrote more. And Olivia, who had never had a home of her own, found herself picking tomatoes, organizing photos, and reading psalms by the stove. She started keeping her faith notes in a wooden box, handmade by a craftsman from the nearby village. Every night, she wrote a new one. Not for others, but for herself. It was as if, finally, she had found the home that had always existed inside her, but that the world had insisted on ignoring. It was early autumn when Olivia asked in a low voice to return to the hotel where it all began. She didn't want a reunion, nor apologies. She just wanted to walk through the halls as a guest, not for revenge, but to look into the eyes of a past that no longer hurt. Darius understood. "Do you want me to go with you?" She thought for a moment. I do, but I'll go in alone." The next day they left early. The road wound between the golden trees. The car ascended slowly up the mountain. Darius parked far from the entrance. Olivia got out with the same small suitcase as always and the crucifix around her neck. The Cedar Hill Lodge looked different. New receptionists, new uniforms, smiles, more practiced. But the walls, those still held echoes. Olivia walked past the entrance with steady steps. No one recognized her. No one knew, and that was exactly what she wanted, to be free from the image of a victim, from the interrupted story. She sat in the dining room for a few minutes. She watched the staff laughing, smiled, had a coffee. Then she walked to the garden and approached the small, deactivated chapel in the back of the property, where no one had gone since the pandemic. She pushed the door carefully. The scent of old wood was still there. The simple altar covered in dust, the worn cross, the empty pews. Olivia knelt. She took a folded note from her pocket and placed it on the altar. Written in her insecure handwriting was, "The world judges by words. God listens to the heart." She stayed there for a few minutes, eyes closed, her hand over her chest. Then she stood up, took a deep breath, and left in silence. She didn't need anyone to know. Because true justice, the kind that cleanses the soul, never happens under the spotlight. It blooms when no one is watching. As she left, she found Darius leaning against the car, looking at the sky. "Took you a while," he said, but with a smile. She responded lightly, I needed to calm down so the world inside could quiet." On the way back, they talked little, but there was something different in the air. Darius turned on the radio and a soft song filled the car. Olivia rested her head on the glass, watching the trees pass in silence. Deep down, tucked between the pages of Darius's notebook, was a copy of that note. Because even without seeking applause, her truth was now unforgettable. When they arrived at the mansion, the garden was in full bloom. Amara waited on the porch with a simple bouquet picked from the yard. She handed it to Olivia without saying a word. The two embraced. Long, silent as if they understood everything, Olivia entered the house, lit the stove, and heated the water for tea. Darius opened the office window and smiled. For the first time in years, everything seemed in place, because the pain hadn't disappeared. But now, it had solid ground to grow. Olivia never had luxury, fame, or a loud voice. But she had something the world insists on ignoring: silent courage. She was judged for her speech, for her background, for not knowing how to defend herself with the right words. But her entire life had already been a defense, built on small gestures, faithful service, and a faith that doesn't shout. And in the end, it was precisely that quiet way that disarmed the lie. She didn't need to win with strength. She just had to remain standing. And when the truth came, she was already ready. This story doesn't end with revenge, nor with applause. It ends with a blooming garden, a girl playing the piano, and a woman with calloused hands writing notes of faith in silence. Because sometimes, God answers without making noise. He uses the right people when no one else is looking. Olivia didn't want justice in the spotlight. She wanted peace on her pillow. And she found it when someone finally saw in her what had always been there: value. Not for her resume, but for her character. And now tell me, how many times have you ignored someone like Olivia? How many times have you mistaken shyness for weakness, simplicity for incapacity, silence for inferiority? This story is a reminder that truth doesn't always appear with spotlights. Sometimes it enters through the back door, carries flowers, and cleans the world without asking for anything in return. And when justice finally sees this truth, no system can resist. What you do with it now is your choice. But one thing is certain: if you'll never look at a chambermaid the same way again. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel, turn on the bell, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because whole lives are happening in silence, waiting for just one look that truly sees.